Welcome to Two Suns in the Sky, Who Lives, Who Dies. To learn more about this three-part audiobook series, visit twosunsinthesky.com. And now, Part 2, Nibiru Pole Shift, Who Lives, Who Dies, with author and narrator Marshall Masters.
Hello, I'm Marshall Masters, Chief Steward of the Knowledge Mountain Church of Perpetual Genesis. In Part 1 of this three-part series, Purposeful Survival for an Enlightened Future, you learn that as a person in awareness, if you cannot afford to buy a mountain of beans, that's okay. Rather, you need to become worth your weight in beans to the leadership of a faith-based survival community. In the third and final part of this series, The Survival Power of Perpetual Genesis, you'll learn what that plan entails and how to prepare for your role as a teacher, mentor, and comforter. However, in this second part of the series, we're going to answer the one question that will be on everyone's minds once we all see a clear and present danger. That being, will we survive? This is why the second part is titled Nibiru Pole Shift, Who Lives, Who Dies. With this in mind, let's quickly review the three leading causes of death during the coming tribulation. The number one cause of death during the Planet X tribulation will be denial. The number two cause of death will be procrastination. And the number three cause of death will be location, especially during the Nibiru Pole Shift event. So let's take a quick look at that. In 1980, a granite monument was erected in Elbert County, Georgia. We know it today as the Georgia Guidestones, and it is inscribed with 10 guidelines in 8 different languages: English, Spanish, Swahili, Sanskrit, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. What the first guideline tells us is to maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. What the first guideline does not tell us is how humanity will be reduced to this level. This is important because it will not happen all at once. Rather, what we'll see during the coming Planet X tribulation is a decade or more of death and suffering where there will be long periods of relative calm, punctuated by brief moments of cataclysm, claiming thousands, if not millions of lives at a time. However, the worst event will be the Nibiru Pole Shift, or the Days of Darkness as some call it. This is when Nibiru, the outermost major planet of the Planet X system, passes between Earth and the Sun. When this happens, billions will die, as has been foretold in prophecies, predictions, and wisdom texts. This is why I believe the real message of the Georgia Guidestones is not that 9 out of 10 will perish. It is that the 1 in 10 who do survive the tribulation will do so because they think like survivors. They observe the world about them as it is, formulate a plan, and then take action on that plan, even though it may not be the best possible choice. Why does this work? Louis Pasteur said it best. A 19th century French biologist, microbiologist, and chemist, Pasteur is famous for discovering the principles of vaccination and pasteurization. The key to his success was his powers of observation, and so the wisdom he passed down to us is this: that chance favors the prepared mind. Evolution tells us that if we want to survive the coming tribulation, we must be resourceful, or we will die. Yet, 90% or more of all Americans refuse to even take the smallest peek at the evidence of what is coming. Is this by choice, or is this how their brains work? This is the question we'll explore with denial causalities. Most who have been in awareness for some time often were in awareness when they were children. Is this you? And is this awareness more of a curse than a blessing for you? Especially whenever you try and share your awareness with friends and families. And to what end? Inevitably, you are mocked, ridiculed, and threatened into silence. If you've never been in a situation like this, what does it feel like? If you were in awareness, it would feel like you were the only one-eyed person in a land of the blind. And what are the blind telling you? Hey, stupid, get a sharp stick and poke out your one good eye, so you can be clever like the rest of us. That's what it feels like. And I'm not saying this to be humorous. Rather, I'm stating a scientific fact. On February 22, 2017, a new study by the American Psychological Association was widely reported by the media. The study drew data from 2 nationally representative studies involving 2,000 adults in Germany and Spain. The results were stunning. The study found that as many as 90% of test subjects do not want to know about negative events in the future. Interestingly enough, the study also found that as many as 70% felt the same about future positive events. So, what about those in awareness? According to the study, those in awareness are pretty rare, especially when you consider that only 10% of the survey participants consistently expressed a desire to know about the future. Dr. Gerd Geigreisner of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development sums it up perfectly. Not wanting to know appears counterintuitive and may raise eyebrows, but deliberate ignorance, as we've shown here, doesn't just exist. It is a widespread state of mind. So there it is. Science is telling us that denial is a widespread state of mind. What will deniers say about this? The usual. It's all nonsense, nothing is going to happen, and I don't want to hear about it. But for me, the findings of this study triggered a magnificent epiphany. That only a few of us are hardwired by nature to consider something as violent as the Planet X tribulation. The mechanism is called brain dominance. Once you understand this, you'll understand how precious the gift of awareness is. Back in 2002, I first became interested in brain dominance, the difference between left brain thinkers and right brain thinkers. Using tests available at the time, I determined that I was actually a whole brain synchronized thinker. That being, the left and right hemispheres of my brain are balanced. With this in mind, let's explore right brain dominance together. Left brain thinkers tend to be time-oriented, logical thinkers. Sequential and analytical by nature, they favor tightly ordered checklists and tend to look at the smaller details before looking at the big picture. The left hemisphere of our brain controls the right side of our body. Other left brain functions include analytical, logic, math and science, number skills, objectivity, reasoning, spoken language, and written language. Right brain thinkers are often more creative than their left brain counterparts, and more likely to call upon their intuition in a given situation than to examine all of the facts. In other words, right brain thinkers tend to trust their gut instinct more than left brain thinkers. The right hemisphere of our brain controls the left side of our body, and other right brain functions include 3D shapes, creativity, emotion, holistic thought, imagination, insight, intuition, music and art awareness, and synthesizing. Whether you are a left brain thinker or a right brain thinker, it is important to note that we need both hemispheres, and proof of this are whole brain synchronization thinkers. With whole brain synchronization, both hemispheres of the brain are in balance and work in harmony. Interestingly enough, humanity's greatest philosophers, thinkers, inventors, and artists tend to be whole brain synchronized thinkers. But what about those in awareness? Did God hardwire them to survive the coming Planet X tribulation? Let's take a hard look at that. Most in awareness are not financially successful people. They have big hearts and small wallets. Therefore, it's no wonder they ask, if I cannot afford bullets, beans, and bunkers, is God punishing me? If this is you, here's my answer. God is not punishing you. Rather, you're just a stranger in a strange land of left-brained people. To help you frame this answer, let's look at some basic differences between left-brained and right-brained Americans. Keep in mind, we're speaking in general terms, and that there are always exceptions to the rule. Left-brained thinkers do not often rely on intuition or instinct. Rather, they look at facts and tradition. Right-brain dominant people are artistic, innovative, and use free association thought processes to achieve originality and inventiveness. Left-brain thinkers generally prefer organized religions because they are predictable and spell out how people should conduct themselves. Right-brain thinkers generally prefer spirituality to the rigid dogma and doctrine of organized religions. Left-brain thinkers tend to use our world to achieve their ends, often at the expense of their own happiness and the environment. Lawyers, judges, and bankers tend to be left-brain. Right-brain thinkers gravitate to occupations that require creative thinking, perceptiveness, and spontaneity, such as politics, acting, and athletics. Right-brain thinkers respond to negative feedback and are more likely to cut their losses short, whereas left-brain thinkers tend to become locked into narrow points of view where they limit themselves to doing things the way they've been done before. Left-brain thinkers become experts at denying anything is wrong or of having made a wrong decision. Ergo, left-brain thinkers can be ever optimistic even while stepping off a cliff. In other words, a left-brain thinker jumping off a 20-story office building can be totally convinced that he or she is flying for the first 19 floors on the way down. As someone in awareness, are you an exception, and are there others like you? Here I can shed some interesting light on the question. As I mentioned earlier, in 2002 I first became interested in brain dominance. Since then, I've informally profiled interactions with those in awareness who have contacted me through my research and publishing efforts on my website, Your Own World USA, to assess their brain dominance. Again, It was never a formal study. Rather, I was just curious and kept the information to myself. Now, for the very first time, I want to share the general results. This is because those who are spiritually drawn to the Knowledge Mountain Church of Perpetual Genesis present the very same brain dominance patterns that I saw with those drawn to my science publishing efforts for the last 15 years. In other words, whether folks are drawn to my work for reasons of science or spirituality makes no difference. The two other significant trends I've observed over the years are: the distribution patterns never vary, and the more people I've profiled, the easier it became. Let's examine the brain dominance results of my informal study of those in awareness about the coming Planet X flyby, beginning with the left brain thinkers. One constant throughout the years has been that only 5% of the people who are aware of Planet X are left brain thinkers. I call them the perceptives, because they usually do not come to the topic through dreams, visions, and premonitions as others do. Rather, they observe the world as it is and how it relates to their risk posture. Most often, this is because of their profession, where they take risks, evaluate risks, or manage risks. Now, let's look at whole brain synchronized thinkers. As a group, whole brain synchronized thinkers tend to come from highly technical fields and those dealing with the arts. This group constitutes 20% of all the people with an interest in Planet X. And finally, let's move on to right brain thinkers. Right brain thinkers constitute the vast majority of people with an awareness of the coming tribulation. They represent 75% of the people I come into contact with on this topic. Unlike the left brain people in awareness, or perceptives as I call them, the right brain supermajority often struggles to survive. So now you know the brain dominance statistical breakdown for everyone who is following my work on the coming Planet X tribulation. With this in mind, I want to focus on the most intriguing statistical dichotomy presented in this program. Only 5% of the people who follow my work on Planet X are left brain thinkers. Keep that number in mind as we compare this small minority of those who follow my work with the total population of the United States. When we do, the numbers literally flip-flop, because 95% of all Americans are left brain thinkers. This is important because this statistic brings us back to the study published by the American Psychological Association on February 22, 2017. According to that study, as many as 90% of the test subjects did not want to know about negative events in the future. Given that 95% of all Americans are left brain thinkers, the numbers correlate when it comes to Planet X. Those most likely to be in denial will be left brain dominant. Yet oddly enough, intelligence agencies in America, Russia, and elsewhere appreciate the value of right brain thinkers. It is why they use psychics and remote viewers. Both paranormal intelligence gathering techniques are highly effective, and the only real difference is preference. American intelligence agencies prefer remote viewers over psychics, and the reverse is true for Russian intelligence agencies. While the techniques differ, both use the right hemisphere of the brain. This is because the right hemisphere of the brain is what I call a cosmic transceiver. For those of you in awareness, you need to understand that psychics and remote viewers employed by these agencies only use a limited amount of their God-given right brain functionality, and when they do, just for specific purposes. Why do American intelligence agencies prefer remote viewers over psychics? While psychics must be right brain dominant, remote viewers can be left brain dominant because they only use a limited and specific portion of their right brain functionality. I call these the lower right brain functions. So why is it that left brain dominant thinkers appear to be hardwired for denial? Again, we go back to the observation of Dr. Gerd Geigenrenzer of the Max Planck Institute, who makes the case for left brain thinker denial when he says, deliberate ignorance, as we've shown here, doesn't just exist. It is a widespread state of mind. Furthermore, his observation of deliberate ignorance clearly applies to America's left-brained majority, which in turn raises an existential life or death question. Who will live and who will die? Before we tackle that question, we need to examine the number 2 cause of death during the coming Planet X tribulation, that being procrastination. No matter how vociferous one is in protecting the bliss of ignorance with denial, it can all end in a very unsettling instant. One day you see something that strikes you as being out of place, and you ask that point of no return question, what exactly am I looking at? This is when your denial ends and awareness begins, and frankly, it's never a pleasant experience. Awareness comes to us in many different ways, but the experience is always the same. You're salmon slapped, as I call it, because you feel like you've just been slapped upside the head with a dead salmon, and there you are, spitting scales and wondering just what happened. But awareness does not mean that you're ready to take action. In fact, many people who come into awareness use procrastination to cope with their new reality. They assure themselves that if they just observe the situation without taking action, that they're doing something constructive. It is like nailing one foot to the floor. No matter how much you spin around, the scenery never changes. This is why procrastination will be the number 2 cause of death during the coming Planet X tribulation. Yes, people will know the truth, but they will fail to take constructive action because they do not want to admit to themselves that life as we know it is coming to an end. This is hope against hope, a desperate belief that by some remote fraction of a possibility, nothing will happen. Yet it will. For me, I've thought about procrastination since I was a boy of 9. That was when I first learned that all of my relatives on my mother's side in Europe died in the Nazi concentration camps. It is a sobering thing to learn that an entire branch of your family tree is as lifeless as the cold vacuum of deep space. I'll never know their names or anything about them. But one thing I know is this: I do love them very much, and my will to honor their sacrifice has given me the tenacity to continue my research since 2002. Yet I often wonder, could there have been an alternate outcome for my relatives in 1933? The year German President Hindenburg named Adolf Hitler as the Führer. I often wondered, had they read Mein Kampf, published in 1925? In it, Hitler said, "I believe that I am acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. By defending myself against the Jew, I am fighting for the work of the Lord." How many of my relatives in 1933 had hoped against hope that the German people would not be lured in by Hitler's anti-Semitic rants? that the German people were too dignified and noble for such a thing, that it was better to procrastinate by observing future developments. But how long could this strategy go on? Most likely that period of procrastination ended in 1938 during the Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, when the Nazis unleashed a national campaign of violence against Jews in Germany. Fighting for the work of the Lord, as Hitler put it, the Nazis burned synagogues everywhere, and shops were wrecked, the contents looted as thousands of Jews were arrested. Yes, by that time it was too late for deniers and procrastinators alike. And so the question nags me. What if my relatives had been ready to imagine the unimaginable in 1933 and had the courage to take action? How many of them could have survived the Holocaust? So here we are, and there's an old saying, what goes around comes around. Perhaps we need to ask ourselves, who amongst us is willing to imagine the unimaginable and to take action? This is the real question of our time, and it is not a question intended for a minority, but rather each and every one of us. What should we do? A former American First Lady gave us the answer. Long before Adolf Hitler's rise to power, Eleanor Roosevelt said, "You must do the thing you think you cannot do." It was wise advice indeed. Keep her advice in mind as we now answer the existential question, who lives and who dies? So, who lives and who dies? Let's begin with the ones most likely to die. Earlier, we learned that we live in a country where 95% of the people are left-brain thinkers, and where 90% of the people tell those of us in awareness that the coming Planet X tribulation is all nonsense, that nothing is going to happen, and that they do not want to hear about it. Where does this toxic combination of denial logic and left-brain thinking come from? Perhaps it's not something we're born to do, but rather taught to do. America's public school systems are heavily influenced by the Prussian education system reforms of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The goal being to teach children and young adults to be obedient to authority. Consequently, those who graduate these schools do so with a heavy orientation towards left-brain thinking, the kind that rewards Western consumer societies with left-brain thinking workers and consumers. On the other hand, homeschooled children are better educated and less likely to become mechanistic and procedure-bound. Is there a terrible truth here? That the vast majority of Americans are destined to fail? Something I call failure programming? Is this why the three major causes of tribulation death, denial, procrastination, and location will eventually claim billions of lives during the coming Planet X tribulation? If so, is there an intentional plan at work? One no less malevolent than Adolf Hitler's final solution? Assuming so, this time it is different. That the target is not a minority, but rather our species as a whole. Let's assume that this is so. Who would do it? The 1% of the 1% who control our world from the shadows, and their aims are not to save the world from human overpopulation, though they will be sure to posit that explanation. No, their aim is to reduce global population so they can restore their enslavement of our species after the tribulation has passed. You may be shaking your head in disbelief. And if so, I too once felt this way, that it was inconceivable for me that a premeditated inhumanity on such a vast global scale could be possible. But in time, I came to understand that it is. That it is 1933 all over again, and each of us must choose. For this reason, I am not going to ask you to imagine the unimaginable. This is a substantial reality you need to find on your own. But there is something I can share with you as a researcher and an analyst. A technique I learned a long time ago. It is how you find a great truth, because the greatest truths are by and of necessity simple. You begin with a spot, a single point of truth. To visualize this process, let's imagine a large picture puzzle. When we dump all the pieces onto our tabletop, what is the first thing we do? We search out the four corners of the puzzle, because we know each of these pieces will lead us to all the others, so that we can complete our picture puzzle. In other words, a single point of truth is merely the corner piece of a picture puzzle. Find that corner piece, and everything else will eventually connect to it. To illustrate the concept, let's make a left-brained quilt. We live in a left-brained society with numerous hobbies and pursuits that help us to focus on things other than the dark days coming, like quilting, a time-honored tradition that produces wonderful things. As such, we could say that while we use our right brains to design a quilt, the truth is that we spend most of our time using our left brain to stitch it together. But how does a right-brained thinker see that same quilt? A right-brained thinker also sees a pattern, but one deceptively engineered by the elites who control this world, and who want to ensure the deaths of as many people as possible during the coming Planet X tribulation. And so the end product of all of our wonderfully distracted left-brain quilting is that we wind up in a left-brained slaughterhouse. Now we are ready to answer the question, who lives and who dies? The answer, like all greatest truths, is simple. That those most likely to live will have the courage to imagine the unimaginable, because we must do the things we think we cannot do. A talent more natural to right-brained thinkers. For this reason, those most likely to survive the coming Planet X tribulation will be synchronized whole-brain and right-brain thinkers. However, the point of this program is not fear. It is hope for the future. With this in mind, I am now going to empower you with a positive message about location. The number 3 cause of death during the Planet X tribulation will be location, especially during the Nibiru Pole Shift event, which will claim billions of lives. Why? Because, as we learned in part 1 of this series, the vast majority of humanity lives along the shorelines of a major body of water. These large bodies of water account for 70% of the Earth's surface. And interestingly enough, here's where the incidence of denial is at its highest. Most coastal dwellers not only refuse awareness, but tend to suppress the awareness of those close to them with angry rants. It's all nonsense, nothing is going to happen, and I don't want to hear about it. There are reasons why people cling with such fierce intolerance to their denial, such as the cost of relocation. They know that moving to safer areas inland will entail a loss of income, status, and a burdensome distance from their networks of families and friends. Therefore, the failure to relocate is rooted in the first and second causes of tribulation death, denial, and procrastination. With this in mind, I'm now going to share with those of you who are ready to actively seek relocation some of the basics I share with those who attend my relocation conferences. The Internet is a wonderful tool for identifying potential relocation areas. However, nothing can replace the efficacy of boots-on-the-ground inspections. Here are the basic guidelines I frequently share with others. Location, location, location. Seek remote areas away from major cities. The further, the better, and look for areas where county building codes and permitting processes are not excessively restrictive. Local culture is important. Look for neighborly people with a positive affinity for families and the land. Also remember that after the power grid collapses, city dwellers will flood the surrounding landscape like locusts, and they're not going to be interested in having meaningful and enlightened conversations about sharing what you have. With this in mind, remember, until you establish yourself in a new community, you too will be viewed by the locals as a locust. Distance. Remember, location kills, so distance is vital. Seek areas that are 150 miles from any major body of water, such as an ocean or Great Lake. For smaller bodies, such as lakes and rivers, if you are close to the water level elevation, determine the widest part of the water body and locate your shelter at least twice that distance away from it. Also, keep your distance from areas that flood and are subject to heavy seasonal water flows. Nuclear power generating plants. On March 11, 2011, the world watched in horror as hydrogen explosions tore through the Fukushima Daiichi plant. Since then, it has become an unstoppable nuclear volcano that is killing the Pacific Ocean. During the tribulation, we can expect to see scores of Fukushimas in the United States and elsewhere in the world. This is because when you shut a reactor down, the core still needs to be cooled for another few years. When the national grid fails, there will eventually be no power to operate the water pumps to do that. This is when the worst happens. For this reason, use the following guidelines for avoiding radiation death and cancers. Locate at least 50 miles upwind of and 100 miles downwind of any nuclear power generating plant or nuclear weapons research and development facility. Fracking wells and chemical plants. The concrete casings on fracking wells are designed to last 30 years in normal use. However, some fail on the first day of operation. When severe earthquakes occur on fault lines like the New Madrid, everyone in the country will feel the ground shake. This is when earthquake-related failures in fracking wells and chemical plants will cause entire regions to become unlivable. For this reason, when you see burning water and dead land, keep moving on. It will take nature a few centuries to restore the health of these poisoned lands, and there are no simple rules of thumb for locating these threats. But what you can do is to begin by locating all fracking wells and chemical plants in areas of potential relocation. Then determine the aquifers and water tables below them and seek professional help in determining safe distances. Better yet, avoid these areas altogether. Elevation. Locate to areas that are between 2,000 to 4,000 feet above sea level. High-altitude farming above 5,000 feet is not for amateurs because of a short growing season. Soft earth. Expect solar radiation and drought to cause defoliation, soil degradation, and desertification. This is why you want to locate in an area with rich soil and deep-rooted trees that are drought-resistant. Be sure to look for tree species with deep roots. The point here is that whether or not the trees survive, what matters is that the soil does. Topography. Locate on rolling hills midway up from a valley floor and avoid hilltops. Hilltops are difficult to access and stony, which makes them difficult for cultivation and vulnerable to hypervelocity winds. Likewise, avoid steep hillsides. This is because of mud lahars. Also, avoid plains and flatlands because of widespread grass fires and hypervelocity winds. Ample water. You want streams, springs, lakes, and artesian wells. No sloughs or swamps or any area where water is still or moves very slowly. These slow-moving areas will stay polluted and will not recover for several decades. As to water wells, you can get hand pumps that will pull water from as deep as 300 feet. Below that, you need to use powered mechanical pumps. So make sure that you have wells with sweet water that can support a hand pump. Security. When evaluating properties, make sure you have a member of the team with field combat experience, such as an NCO or an officer. There will be issues of concern for them, and you need to listen to their advice. For example, when preparing a property, cut back the tree line in every direction from your shelter to a distance of 100 yards, so that you have a 360-degree clear field of fire. Observation vantage points. The ideal property either commands the high ground or is at least 1 mile away from an overlooking mountaintop with an unobstructed line of sight. Remember, you will be surveilled from a high ground position if hostiles have a clear line of sight. Better yet, your community will have radio-equipped observation teams positioned on those overlooking hilltops. Keep your distance from Walmart stores. They will be forward operating bases for homeland security. Also, avoid properties adjoining a public crossroads where warlords, militias, and military will usually set up checkpoints to arrest people and to confiscate their property and vehicles. Road access. You need a level, serviceable entry road leading into your property, such as a paved or gravel road for all-season access. It will be essential for heavy vehicles to have ingress to your community for construction, supply delivery, and so forth. Nonetheless, be ready to build tank traps into the road if it becomes necessary to make it impassable for any vehicle. Due diligence. On a land reconnaissance, you will typically work with real estate agents. Always ask for topographical and aerial maps and disclosures of all other information relevant to the property. Also, see if test results on the property are available, such as water, leach field, etc. With wells, you should take a basic water test kit with you to evaluate its potability for yourself. You will also need to determine water flow. Deal with experts. A land reconnaissance team should have one or more members with backgrounds in defensive security, fire and rescue, agriculture, permaculture, real estate law, hydrology or well drilling, geology, and civil engineering. And there you have it, Marshall's Basic Relocation Guidelines. As a final thought, remember to trust your instincts. If after doing your analysis, a location doesn't feel like it is where you need to be, then no matter how sweet the deal is, it's not the right deal for you. On the other hand, if you find yourself in a place where every fiber of your being tells you that this is where you need to be, then make the call. After that, no matter what others may think of your relocation decision, stand your ground if all they can offer are personal preferences and opinions. Remember, survival is about 3 abilities. First, your ability to quickly and accurately assess your situation. Second, your ability to formulate a plan. And third, your ability to take action on that plan even if it is not the best possible plan. There are no guarantees, just the guts to lead decisively. In the third and final part of this 3-part series, The Survival Power of Perpetual Genesis, I'm going to share insights with you to help others as a teacher, mentor, and comforter, so that they can lead decisively. So until the next time we meet, remember Marshall's motto: destiny comes to those who listen, and fate finds the rest. So learn what you can learn, do what you can do, and never give up hope. For the Knowledge Mountain Church of Perpetual Genesis, I'm Marshall Masters.
This program was made possible by the Knowledge Mountain Church of Perpetual Genesis. To learn more, visit knowledgemountain.org. We also encourage you to pursue your awareness path by reading Marshall's book, Surviving the Planet X Tribulation, a faith-based leadership guide. To learn more, visit planetxtribulation.com. Next up in this series is Part 3, The Survival Power of Perpetual Genesis.